The ache began in the arches of my feet, a dull throb that radiated up my calves with every step. My shoes, the best $5 could buy at a thrift store, were never meant for an 8-hour shift on unforgiving marble. I wove through a forest of tuxedos and silk gowns, my silver tray a shield against the glittering crowd. Each clink of a champagne flute was a countdown to the moment I could finally sit down, peel off these instruments of torture, and count my tips. This was just a job, a necessary evil to pay for textbooks and instant noodles. I was a ghost here, paid to be invisible, to serve and to disappear.
That was the world I thought I was in.
A world of polite smiles and empty glasses, of rich people performing richness for each other. But then I saw him. In a quiet corner, away from the swirl of the dance floor, sat a man who commanded the room from a wheelchair. The space around him was a vacuum. People gave his table a wide berth, their laughter quieting as they passed, their eyes skittering away. He was a black hole in the center of a swirling galaxy. And now I could not look away. His name was Dante Moretti, though I did not know it then. All I saw was a man carved from shadow and stillness. His suit was a masterpiece of tailoring, cut from a dark wool that seemed to drink the light, designed to sit perfectly even as he was seated. His hands rested on the arms of his chair, large and still, one bearing a heavy gold signet ring that looked ancient and severe. He wasn't watching the dancers. He was watching the room, his gaze missing nothing, his expression a mask of cold neutrality. I had refilled the glasses at his table twice. He never spoke, just gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The men with him, his capos and soldiers I would later learn, spoke in low, deferential tones, their bodies angled toward him like iron filings to a magnet. They laughed when it seemed appropriate, but their eyes were always on him, gauging his reaction. He offered none. The orchestra swelled into a slow, romantic waltz. Couples drifted onto the floor, a kaleidoscope of color and movement. I saw a woman in a glittering emerald dress whisper something to her companion, her eyes flicking toward Dante's corner with a look that was equal parts pity and disdain. The man with her smirked. The sight sent a hot spike of something sharp and unfamiliar through me. It was anger, raw, protective anger for a man I did not know. I do not know what possessed me. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the champagne fumes, or that sudden, fierce blaze of indignation. I finished my circuit, placed my empty tray on a service stand, and straightened my simple black uniform. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the smooth melody of the violins. This was stupid. This was reckless. I was a nobody. He was something else entirely. But my feet were already moving, carrying me across the marble floor, closing the distance I had seen everyone else so carefully maintain. His men stiffened as I approached. One of them, a thick-necked man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, took a half-step forward to intercept me. But Dante lifted a single finger, a minute gesture that stopped the man cold. His eyes found mine. They were dark, the color of coffee grounds, and held a depth that felt ancient. There was no warmth in them, only a piercing analytical intelligence. He was assessing me, dismantling me piece by piece. I felt my courage waver, my throat suddenly dry. I stopped in front of his wheelchair. The music swirled around us, a world away. I had no plan, no words prepared. The ones that came out were a surprise even to me, quiet but clear in the small pocket of silence he commanded. "Dance with me," I said. The man with the scar actually choked. The air grew thick, heavy. Dante's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of disbelief, perhaps. Or maybe, for the first time all night, genuine curiosity. He thought I was mocking him. I could see it in the slight tightening of his jaw. I rushed to explain, my voice dropping even lower. "I just meant you're sitting here alone, and everyone else is. I could just stand with you for a song. We don't have to move. Just so you're not alone." The silence that followed was absolute. He stared at me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. He was looking for the angle, the trick, the reason for this bizarre intrusion. He would not find one. There was nothing but a foolish, impulsive girl in cheap shoes. Then he did the impossible. His hands gripped the leather arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white. A tremor ran through his powerful shoulders. A low sound, a guttural breath of exertion, escaped his lips. The man with the scar whispered his name, a note of alarm in his voice. "Boss." But Dante was already moving. He pushed, his entire upper body straining with an effort that seemed monumental. The muscles in his neck corded. For a terrifying second, I thought he would fall. Then, with a slow, deliberate agony that silenced the entire ballroom, he stood. The music faltered, one violin screeching into silence, then another, until the only sound was the collective gasp of 200 people. He was unsteady, his legs trembling beneath him, but he was on his feet, taller than I could have imagined. A giant of a man, breathing hard, his dark eyes locked on my face. 12 years. 12 years he had sat in that chair. I did not know it then, but the entire city knew. The man who could not be moved, who ruled a criminal empire from a throne of steel and leather, was standing. For me. He took a single, difficult step forward, his hand leaving the chair to brace on the table. The movement was stiff, painful to watch. His men started toward him, but he shot them a look that froze them in place. His focus was entirely on me. "You," he said, his voice a low gravelly rumble that cut through the stunned silence. "What is your name?" "Clara," I whispered, my own name sounding foreign. He nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. He looked down at me, and I saw the immense cost of what he had just done. Sweat beaded on his temples, his face was pale beneath his olive skin, and his breathing was labored, but his eyes held a terrifying fire. She believed she did a kind thing, a small act of defiance against the casual cruelty of the world. But she had just pulled the pin from a grenade that had been dormant for more than a decade. He was not just a man in a chair. He was Dante Moretti, and by making him stand, she had made herself the center of his world. There was no going back. There was no disappearing. "Now," he said, his voice a promise and a threat. "You have my attention." The gala ended abruptly, at least for me. Two of Dante's men, their faces impassive, escorted me away from the ballroom floor. They did not touch me, but their presence was a cage. I was led not to the kitchens to clock out, but to a private study off the main hall, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of old leather and his cologne, a clean, sharp scent of cedar. Dante was already there, seated now in a large armchair, the hated wheelchair nowhere in sight. The effort of his demonstration had clearly taken its toll. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. But the power in the room had not diminished. It had concentrated, focused entirely on me. He dismissed his men with a flick of his wrist. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, leaving us alone. The silence was thick, charged. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the expensive rug, my server's apron suddenly feeling like a costume. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "I sit." My hands were trembling, so I clasped them in my lap. I kept my eyes on a point just past his shoulder, afraid of what I might see if I met his gaze. "Why did you do that?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I saw them looking at you, laughing. I thought it was cruel." "It was," he agreed, his tone flat. "The world is cruel. That is its nature. You should not concern yourself with it." "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "I didn't mean to cause a scene." "You did not cause a scene," he corrected me. "You caused an event. There is a difference. Men in my world have been waiting 12 years for that event. My enemies have been praying it would never happen. You, a girl serving champagne, made it happen in under 5 minutes. This makes you interesting." He leaned forward slightly, the movement careful. "It also makes you a target." That was the moment the floor dropped out from under me. This wasn't about a social embarrassment. This was about something far more dangerous. The way he said enemies wasn't abstract. It was specific. It was a promise of violence. He saw the fear in my eyes. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face before the mask of indifference slid back into place. He gestured to my feet. "Your shoes are worn out." The observation was so unexpected it startled me. I looked down at the scuffed black flats. "They get the job done."
For how long? He asked.
It wasn't a real question. He already knew the answer. He knew I was poor, that I was temporary, that I was utterly out of my depth. He saw everything. He fell silent for a long moment, studying me. I felt like a butterfly pinned to a board. He was a man who dealt in calculations, in debts and leverage. I had just, with one stupid act of compassion, inserted myself into his ledger. He was trying to decide which column I belonged in, asset or liability. The door opened without a knock. The man with the scarred eyebrow entered. He ignored me completely. The Ricci's man was at the bar. He left right after. "The message is already on its way." Dante's expression hardened, the neutrality evaporating to reveal the cold, hard granite beneath. "Let them talk. They will see soon enough." He turned his gaze back to me. "You cannot go home tonight." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a fact. I have class in the morning." I stammered, the mundane protest sounding absurd, even to my own ears. "Your education will be taken care of," he said, as if swatting away a fly. "Paolo will take you to the penthouse. You will stay there. You are under my protection now." "I didn't ask for your protection," I said, a spark of my earlier defiance returning. "You did not have to," he replied, his voice dangerously soft. "You asked me to dance. In my world, that is a binding contract. Everything that happens now happens because of that." There was a commotion in the hallway, a raised voice, then a sharp command. Paolo, the man with the scar, moved to the door, listening. Dante watched him, his body tense. For the first time, I saw a crack in his formidable control. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion. His power was absolute, but it was maintained at a terrible price. And his body was a constant, aching reminder of the day that price was almost too high to pay. The so-called car accident. It had been a hit, one that took his younger brother and left him shattered. He had spent 12 years ruling from a place of physical ruin, his grief and rage fueling a legend of untouchable authority. Paolo turned from the door. "It's nothing, boss. Security is handling it." Dante's eyes were still on the door. He had not moved, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. He was a king on a broken throne, surrounded by wolves. In that moment, he was not just a terrifying figure of power. He was vulnerable. Paolo looked at me, then back at Dante. She should go now. This was my chance. My exit. I could argue, refuse, demand to be let go. I could make a scene and hope the hotel security would intervene, that the normal rules of the world still applied here. I should have been terrified. I was. But as I looked at Dante Moretti, a man who had forced his broken body to stand for a stranger, all I felt was a strange, unwanted connection. He had shown me his deepest weakness, and now I was a part of it. I could have run, but I looked at him, at the profound pain and effort etched on his face, and I made a choice. I stood up, but I did not move toward the door. I walked back to his chair. Paolo tensed, but I ignored him. I stopped beside Dante, my hand hovering for a moment before I rested it gently on his shoulder. I felt the hard muscle beneath the expensive wool. He flinched at the contact, a barely perceptible tremor, then went still. He did not look at me, but I felt his gaze on me all the same. I stayed. Therefore, my old life was over. The days that followed were a surreal dream. I lived in a gilded cage at the top of a skyscraper that overlooked the entire city. The penthouse was vast and silent, decorated in shades of gray and black, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made me feel like I was floating. I had a closet full of clothes I hadn't chosen, food I hadn't ordered, and a silence that was broken only by the quiet movements of Dante's staff. He was rarely there. He was rebuilding, re-establishing a dominance that had been defined by his stillness for over a decade. His standing up was not just a physical act. It was a declaration of war. I would hear whispers from the guards stationed in the hall, snippets of conversation about the Ricci family, the old rivals who had put him in that chair. They were testing him, pushing at the edges of his territory, trying to see if the lion could truly walk again, or if it was just a final, desperate roar. When I did see him, it was late at night. He would return, looking more exhausted than the last time, the physical toll of his new reality etched on his face. He was in physical therapy for hours every day, forcing atrophied muscles to obey, battling a pain I could only imagine. He moved with a pronounced limp, often using a simple, unadorned cane of dark wood. He never used the wheelchair again. One night, I found him in the study, a glass of amber liquid untouched on the table beside him. He was staring out the window at the city lights, but he wasn't seeing them. His face was a mask of grief. "It was my brother's anniversary," he said, without turning around. He knew I was there. He always knew. The day of the accident. Marco was driving. He finally turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw the wound he truly carried. It wasn't in his legs. It was in his eyes. A raw, unhealing grief. They shot out the tires. We went off the bridge. I woke up in a hospital. They told me my legs were gone. And my brother, he was gone, too. I was the head of the family.
He was supposed to be safe.
My first and most important job was to protect him. And I failed. He looked away, his jaw tight. For 12 years, every time I looked at that chair, I saw him. I saw my failure. I walked over and sat in the chair across from him, the same way I had at the gala. "You didn't fail him," I said softly. "You survived." "Survival is not victory," he countered, his voice rough. "It is merely a postponement of defeat." We sat in silence. In this quiet, unguarded moment, he was not the fearsome mafia boss. He was just a man, haunted by his ghosts. And I was not a prisoner. I was the only person in his life who was not part of that world, the only one who had seen him not as a symbol of power, but simply as a man alone in a corner. The attack came 2 days later. It wasn't on him.
It was on me.
I had finally convinced Paolo to let me go to a campus library to pick up some books I needed. I went with 2 guards, discreet but ever-present. On the walk back to the car, a black sedan screeched around the corner, tires smoking. It jumped the curb, heading straight for me. There was no time to think. One of my guards shoved me violently to the ground, his body covering mine as the car roared past, missing us by inches. The second guard was already firing his weapon, the sound cracking through the quiet afternoon. The sedan sped off, disappearing into traffic. I lay on the pavement, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the air. The guard helped me up, his face grim. "Are you okay, miss?" I was shaking, but I nodded. My knee was scraped and bleeding, my new jeans torn. But I was alive. It was a message, sent from the Riccis to Dante. A message that said, "We can get to her. We can get to your weakness." When we got back to the penthouse, Dante was waiting. He took one look at my torn jeans and the blood on my knee, and a rage so cold and absolute filled the room that I took a step back. He didn't yell. He didn't move. He simply became lethal. "Paolo," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Find the car. Find the driver. Bring him to me." Paolo nodded once and left. Dante walked over to me, his limp more pronounced than I'd ever seen it. He knelt, with great difficulty, in front of me, his eyes examining the scrape on my knee. His touch was surprisingly gentle as his thumb brushed away a piece of gravel. "I should have sent you away," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "I put you in this world." "You didn't," I said, my voice shaking. "I walked into it. I asked you to dance, remember?" He looked up at me, his dark eyes searching mine. The rage was still there, but beneath it was something else. Fear. Not for himself, but for me. The police arrived, asking questions. I looked at Dante, then at the 2 detectives. I knew what I had to do. I described a different car, a different driver. I told them I must have tripped and fallen into the street, that it was all a blur.
Elite.
Cleanly, calmly, I lied to the police to protect the man who had just tried to kill me, all to give Dante the time he needed to handle it his way. I crossed a line I could never uncross. After the police left, Dante stood in front of me, his expression unreadable. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why would you do that for me?" I met his gaze, my fear gone, replaced by a strange, hard certainty. "You stood up for me," I said. It seemed like the least I could do. That was our confession. Not of love, but of something far more complicated. Loyalty.
Alliance.
A debt acknowledged and repaid. He reached out and cupped my face in his hand, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was a brand. But my act of loyalty, my choice to stand with him, had not saved me. It had only painted a brighter target on my back. I had chosen a side. And in Dante Moretti's world, that meant the war had just become personal. The final move came a week later. They took me from the one place I should have been safe, Dante's home. It was a betrayal from within. One of the newer guards, a man whose family owed the Riccis a debt, unlocked a service entrance. They were professionals.
Silent, fast.
A cloth over my mouth, the sickly sweet smell of chloroform, and then darkness. I woke up in a cold, damp warehouse, the smell of brine and decay thick in the air. I was tied to a chair. Across from me, a man with pale, reptilian eyes smiled.
Marco Ricci.
The son of the man Dante had replaced, the brother of the men who had died trying to kill him. "He will come for you," Ricci said, his voice a mocking drawl. "The whole city is talking. The great Dante Moretti, on his feet again. All for a little waitress. He shows his weakness, and I will be the one to cut it from him." Fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but my mind was surprisingly clear. I was not the same girl who had served champagne a few weeks ago. I had stood in the shadow of a king, and some of that darkness had clung to me. I wasn't a fighter, but I was an observer. I watched everything. I noticed the way the ropes were tied, the frayed wire hanging from a junction box on the wall, the nervous way one of the younger guards kept checking his phone. They made the call. They put the phone to my ear, and I heard Dante's voice, tight with a control that was barely holding back a hurricane. "Clara," he said my name differently than anyone else. It was not a question, but a statement. A claim. "I'm okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And then I did the only thing I could think of. I gave him a weapon. "It smells like the old fish market on the pier," I said. "The one that closed down 5 years ago." Ricci slapped the phone from my hand. Clever girl, but the damage was done. I had given Dante a location. I had bought him time. Now I had to buy myself some. My chance came when Ricci was distracted, arguing with one of his men. The young guard with the phone was closest to me. "She's going to get us all killed," he muttered, his leg jiggling with anxiety. "Your boss is a fool," I said to him, my voice low and urgent. "He thinks he can win. But Dante Moretti has been planning his revenge for 12 years. Do you really want to be here when he arrives?" I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. I pushed harder. "Let me go.
I'll tell him you helped me."
"He'll be in your debt." It was a long shot, but the kid was terrified. While Ricci's back was turned, he moved behind me, his knife flashing as he sliced at the ropes on my wrists. "Go," he hissed.
Now. I didn't hesitate.
I scrambled to my feet and ran, not for the main door, but for the back. Just as I reached it, I heard the sound of cars screeching to a halt outside. Gunshots erupted, a deafening cacophony of violence. The warehouse door burst open. But it wasn't one of Dante's men who stood there, silhouetted against the flashing lights. It was Dante himself. He wasn't using his cane. He was walking, each step a testament to sheer, indomitable will, his limp a rhythm of controlled pain. He held a gun in his hand, moving with a lethal grace that was terrifying to behold. He was no longer a king on a broken throne. He was the god of vengeance, come to reclaim what was his. His eyes found mine across the chaotic room, and in them I saw a promise. The firefight was short and brutal. Dante's men were surgical. But Dante only had eyes for one man. He walked toward Marco Ricci, who stood frozen in a mixture of shock and fear. Dante was not supposed to be able to do this. He was supposed to be a cripple. "You took my brother," Dante said, his voice low and devoid of all emotion. "You tried to take me, and now you tried to take her. You have taken everything from me for the last time." He did not rescue me. I had already freed myself. He was here to end a war. And he did. The final gunshot echoed in the vast, empty space. When it was over, he walked to me, his steps still measured and painful. He stopped in front of me, his chest rising and falling. He reached out, not to touch my face, but to gently pull a piece of debris from my hair. The cost of this night was written all over him. Every step was agony, but he had taken them.
For me.
His men secured the scene, silent and efficient. The world of violence receded, leaving just the two of us in the center of the storm's eye. "You are mine, Clara," he said. It was not a question of ownership. It was a statement of fact, of belonging. He was mine and I was his. Our bond had not been forged in whispered promises, but in gunfire and blood. My old life, the world of thrift store shoes and tuition payments, was a ghost. It was gone forever. I had asked a man to dance, and he had risen from the ashes of his own life to meet me. We ended up back in his study, the city lights a silent witness below. He was seated again, not in the wheelchair, but in his large armchair by the fire, the cane resting against its side. The battle was over, but the war inside his own body would never end. I stood behind him, my hand resting on his shoulder, a familiar weight now. He reached up and covered my hand with his own, his grip strong and sure.
We didn't speak.
There was nothing left to say. I was no longer a waitress, and he was no longer just the man in the chair. We were a new kind of power, born in a moment of impossible defiance. A choice had been made. A world had been accepted. And in the quiet of that room, with my hand on his shoulder, I knew I was finally home.